Right, item 1 then, apologies for absence, please, Ariana.
Yes, Chair, received apologies for absence from councillors Campbell, Chesters, Seaspear, Elspear, Tacker, Walker and Yaxley.
Lovely. Are we all in agreement to approve them?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Item 2, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held 22nd of September 2022, pages 5 to 10.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Thank you.
I'll second.
And all those in
Thank you.
favour?
I won't vote because I'm running out.
Yeah.
So 1 abstention. Item 3, item 4, which in the opinion of the chair should be considered by the meeting as a matter of urgency. I have nothing. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone over Zoom?
I just need one, but I don't know if I've sent it. Does that still stand out? No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Item 5, to agree the agenda between part A and part B. We have no part B, staying on to part A. Item 6, draft animal licensing policy, proposed amendments, pages 11 to 62, report by the Public Protection Manager.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Lee for this report. It's kindly done a lot of work in bringing us a draft policy, which we've had a period of consultation on, and we've got a large number of responses, like the packing carriage policy. We've got a really good response, and it's really nice to have that level of feedback that we can consider as a collective and make any amendments as they're appropriate. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this follows on from the 10th of May when we approved the consultation. We ran the consultation from the 20th of June until the 15th of August, and as Katie said, we got really good engagement with that. So we got a really good number of direct responses to ourselves, but responses through the consultation portal, but also direct responses to us as well. So we got bodies such as the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons to comment on the policy as well. And we also had a number of existing licence holders that made comments as well to us. And we had some really good constructive feedback and comments on it, I would say, actually, again. It wasn't just a sort of ticking the box job. People did put comments through and stuff, and we've tried to take account of those. But if I could just take you back to the 10th of May, which seems a world away now, doesn't it, really? Time flies and everything. But we outlined, a brand new policy effectively there, and some particular details were of note there. We set out how we intend to enforce animal licensing in North Devon, and the expectations from the council in terms of the people that they would license, and how we would interpret the law basically in terms of people that don't have licenses. So we've set that out, which I think is always useful from a legal perspective to have that in a public document. We've set out how we would administer the star rating scheme. The star rating scheme, from a licensing officer's point of view, kind of came out of nowhere basically a few years back. There was a DEFRA consultation, and they looked at a wide range of kind of options for how they could influence and change animal licensing, and at no point did the star rating feature in that consultation. But when it actually came out and they published, it was there. And I have to say, it's been a good thing. I think these sorts of public-facing schemes have been really helpful, and they do inspire public confidence, particularly with the record that we've got with kind of hotel star ratings and also food hygiene ratings. The public like them, I would say. I would say the trade probably don't like them very much for obvious reasons, and that's where this part of the policy comes in. So we set out how we're going to do that. We've set out timeframes around when we would deem to re-inspect premises. So we wanted to have a standstill period, effectively. We felt that was sensible. And the main rationale behind that was we wanted to see sustained compliance or improvement. And we didn't want to change some of these ratings without really having some evidence that that was something that that was going to be sustained there. We detailed the suitability of applicants, so we set out a procedure there for doing DBS checks on applicants as well. running through all of that. And in total, with the consultation, we had 61 responses, 59 through the consultation portal, 2 direct responses. And we've proposed a number of, I would say, minor amendments to the proposed policy as a result of those comments. So we've made a tweak to the proposal to have an independent vet undertaking our horse riding establishments application inspections. Wherever possible, we would like that to be an independent vet, but given the geography of the area, we had a number of comments saying that would possibly be quite challenging, and if we were getting a vet in from elsewhere, we'd potentially be paying quite a lot more for it. We think that in most circumstances we can get an independent vet to do the inspection, but it was essentially a practicality test, both from the officers and from members of the public, basically, that made comment in that regard. So we've changed the wording ever so slightly, that wherever practically, that beloved phrase of kind of council documentation. We looked at the relevance of convictions in the policy, and we've made a tweak there that where somebody has a relevant conviction, they would be referred to a licensing subcommittee for effectively like a fitness and propriety type hearing. We thought that was the appropriate line in that instance. It would still be officers, we're still proposing for it to be officers' delegated powers in terms of the decision to refuse a licence if they feel that a premises doesn't meet the required minimum standards. That should be an officer matter rather than a licensing subcommittee. So following on from inspection, but I think those initial considerations upon application about applicants, I think that's a good thing to put in front of the licensing subcommittee. And we've got quite a strong basis on that, really, with the way we deal with taxi driver applications, and that would mirror the sort of procedure for that. And it's also proposed that the requirement for applicants to undertake a renewal DBS disclosure, but that would be completed in January. And again, that was a practicality aspect from members of the team saying we need to send out documentation a good period in advance, and people know about this, that they can make sure they've got it all organised and they've had a fair notice period with that. But essentially, those are the kind of the amendments that have come out of this. And we've also made some tweaks to the arrangements around trade waste agreements as well to give a greater degree of flexibility with this. So essentially what we're saying is in most instances, if the business is running in a commercial context, we'd expect them to have a trade waste agreement, but rather than having a kind of one size fits all, everybody has to have it, there'd be some degree of delegation to officers to make a determination. If it's very small scale, the officers may determine that it would be okay to license provide that in place. So if I could take you to the recommendation, it's recommended that the Licensing Community Safety Committee firstly consider the representations received in response to the public consultation that are found in Appendix B. Secondly, to consider any further amendments that we wish to make to the revised policy found at Appendix A. And thirdly, to make recommendations to the Strategy and Resources Committee for approval of the policy. I'm happy to take any questions. I appreciate that little quick run through.
Councillor Philip?
You're talking about independent vets. Does that refer to an individual personality vet, one vet, or does it refer to the practice? Because in North Devon, the vast majority are no corporate companies, so you might get any vet. Because it's not very clear on how it's written.
No, absolutely. So it would be another vet that is also registered on the list maintained by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. So there's a specific list for the vets that are qualified to do and experienced in doing riding inspections. So it would be another vet that would feature on that list, basically. So it wouldn't preclude somebody from the same practice undertaking that inspection in the manner that I envisage this is written.
Okay.
I can clarify that though, potentially, if need be.
And the other question is on the starting point, the star thing. When we were discussing it back along, obviously it says here they're going to be high. They start as a high risk.
Mm-hmm.
So which level do they start at as high risk? Because there's different high risk levels. Do they start as a 1-star, 2-star, or 4-star?
Absolutely.
Because I know there was concerns about that.
Yeah. So this is the national framework to the scheme, effectively, that we have to inspect upon. So the presumption, when you do that initial inspection, the first time you go and visit an applicant, would be the maximum star rating they could attain would be 4 stars. So that's something that DEFRA have put into the statutory guidance we have to follow in that regard. It can prove difficult in that respect. Certainly in my experience, I can pick one applicant that I've dealt with in the past, and members of the team may have others, that I've dealt with an applicant that I would otherwise have been able to give that person 5 stars, and I can see the boost that would give them in terms of their business, but we're not allowed to, basically. That's the framework we've got from DEFRA as it stands.
So the best you can kick off with is 4.
Yeah. The other snag with that is that they get inspected. The inspection frequency will be greater for a 4-star as opposed to a 5-star rated premises. So you kick it on for another year if you get that 5-star rating. So they're financially inconvenienced by that as well. I make no bones about it, really.
And like they were saying, like people looking up online,
Yeah.
looking for a good dog kennel or something, they'd say, well, hang on, they've only got 4 stars and so next door got 5.
Yeah.
You know, I think that was a concern, wasn't it?
Absolutely, but I think we're stuck with that in respect until DEFRA make any changes to it.
Thanks.
Councillor Beedham, did I see your hand go?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lee, and everybody involved in this. It's a lot of work and really good. And clearly, public, responses are quite detailed, aren't they? They're engaged in it. I mean, I guess the obvious question is, will we have enough inspectors? And the expectation when this sort of stuff goes out that I suspect it's particularly initially you'll get numerous calls from people, will we be able to have the inspectors to enable it to happen. And it's quite interesting, probably the one that created probably the most interesting was the sex offenders list of whether they were appropriate.
Yeah.
People didn't seem to understand, or it's very small, so didn't seem to be able to correlate the fact that it's not related to animals, but clearly anywhere there's animals will attract children.
Yeah.
So personally totally agree, but obviously we didn't quite get that message across that because they didn't get it that why, if you're a sex offender, should you not be with a horse? You'll actually a horse riding stables will attract children, especially if they're hiring them out to children or giving lessons or whatever. So that was the only thing I just wondered if we needed to beef up is why we expect somebody to have a clear DPS, both on the animal cruelty side of it, but also from the I'm probably using the wrong word when I say the sex offenders list.
Yes.
But if they failed a DPS on and I'm happy to move the recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So could we put something a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for?
We could put an explanatory.
Explanatory note in there as to what the connection is.
I think personally, for me, the example that stands out is riding stables on Saturday morning. You go and do an inspection somewhere like that, and I think we could say that in the policy that there will often be a large number of kind of unattended children there, particularly the ones that they do sort of pony clubs and things like that. So that I think it's absolutely right.
But even a dog breeder, isn't
We
it?
can expand.
With a dog breeder, how often does a family, buy a dog? The child suddenly is going there all the time, to visit puppy before they comes home, that sort of thing. I think it's legitimate. So.
Yeah, same as zoos, tracking zoos, all that sort of thing. Lots of kids that are attracted to those. I have one question about primates, actually. Obviously, that's going to be a no-no to have a primate living on domestic premises. What's going to happen with those that currently do live on domestic premises? I'm presuming the 2 options are it tries to find a home in a zoo or it gets culled.
Absolutely.
Which isn't going to sit well with some people, is it?
No, so at the moment we don't have any, but we may. So I think this is preempting a question in the future, and I think the consultation raised an absolutely fair question mark in that regard. It's do we say no, or do we say this is something that would always go before committee with a presumption of refusal, basically, so that we leave it open that in the case of an absolutely exceptional individual that had fantastic knowledge of the species they're dealing with and fantastic facilities that would still be open. And I think that that's an entirely fair comment if the committee were minded to move in that direction instead. We have similar wording in the policy, in particular around the offences section, that we talk about it being a recommendation for it being referred to committee with a recommendation of refusal. So we're not saying no at that point, but we're saying that they've got a high hurdle to get over to persuade you that it would be suitable. So that would be an option. If you wanted that amended, then we could certainly look to do that.
Just regarding primaries.
Yeah.
I think you like, I think that personally, I
Since we have none already in existence, then there is an issue.
so of an expert,
Yeah.
you know, you bring it to committee, but
Yes, I
do
think
we
it's an
really
issue.
know?
Yeah.
Personally, I would stick it with that.
I think the move nationally is to say we won't deal with that in a domestic environment, because I think the feeling, certainly from the national organisations, is that it would be highly unlikely that an applicant would be able to satisfy you that the work planners can.
I wouldn't have a clue, you know,
Yeah.
you could stick me on a appeals committee. I don't really know how a monkey needs to be looked after properly. It might be they've got a shiny, lovely house and great big garden, but, you know.
Well, we'd have to get an expert,
Oh,
Yeah, we should have to.
we'd have to get an expert to come in and
So,
say
yeah,
that.
I mean, I just personally, no.
Yeah.
And we have got some really good experts who've got, this areas, I think it's Sam Devon Exotics, into this company who's provided very specialist advice where we've had complaints with regard reptiles and things like that, because you can't be an
It's
expert.
an interesting thing going on in Newcastle.
Oh, yes, thanks.
So before I come to Councillor Henderson, I did have one other thing to talk about, back to the sex offences one. I noticed in the section where you were looking at the changes, that it was about reducing it from a definite no to a sort of like a case by case situation. But I'm thinking, well, we don't do that with taxi drivers, why would we do that with anybody? I mean, if a taxi driver realises they have a sexual offence, there is an instant no.
Well, the policy would tell you that the policy would say no, and the wording would be similar actually like that. So effectively, they've still got the ability to go before a licensing subcommittee to make their case, but the presumptive position from the policy is no. So I think we're putting this in a similar vein, basically. So, and I felt that was important to try and correlate that actually when we were looking at this. So we've taken, if you look at the timeframes for offences, they correlate entirely with the taxi offences as well, because that seemed to me a sensible,
Yes.
you know, sort of correlation there, basically, given that we've got some nationally recognised kind of timeframes with the taxi drivers. I know it's different, but it was the one that I was aware of that we could use in that instance, and it's well researched.
That's
That
fine.
one.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you. I shared two questions, but Councillor Bullett's kind of covered the first one with the star rating, because I had a big concern on that one, particularly for new startups. Obviously, they're not going to be penalised now. The second one is it's just a question more than anything. Obviously, they're using independent vet. It's quite a small community, even in North Devon, in terms of the vets, and it's highly competitive. Is there any room to potentially use retired vets? We have an awful lot of them, because they will still be registered with the Veterinary Association. Or, I don't know, Liz, you might be able to answer this. Does the government still employ Ministry of Agriculture vets? They used to, because they used to be the ones that go and inspect slaughterhouses.
They still have vets and they're aware that
Yeah. But
they've got another remit to do that sort of work, I don't know.
But maybe using a DEFRA vet, they wouldn't have any connections whatsoever with any of the organisations. Just an idea.
Yeah.
Using a DEFRA or even retired vets potentially.
Absolutely. What you do find in some areas is that certain retired vets do go and do animal licensing inspections. It's becoming tighter and tighter in the manner that we as officers have seen that the professional qualification for complete inspections has increased very considerably since these regulations have come in. The situation with vets is much the same actually. In order for them to be considered competent to keep their continued professional development up together, it's quite an undertaking to do these inspections for the vets as well. So what we have found is that was something that happened an awful lot before the regulations changed, that we would have kind of semi-retired or retired vets that would come and give us a hand with these inspections. And I think that's becoming probably less common as we go along, because it's become more difficult to keep all your core professional qualifications up together with this, particularly with the riding stables. The other hurdle is having to be on this specific list maintained by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons as well, which isn't a huge list, even looking nationally, actually. So I think we have a couple of vets that are on that list in North Devon.
One in Dalton and one in.
And a couple, I can think of a couple of other vets that I know nearer Exeter, but we're not, we haven't got loads of options in this regard. So again, as I say, in an ideal world, they would be entirely independent. I just, from talking to the team and from looking at those comments from the consultation, I just couldn't guarantee that we would be able to do that. And I didn't want to put forward a policy that we wouldn't be able to achieve, basically.
Yeah, we do only have 2 RCVS listed veterinarians that are qualified to do annual horse riding inspections.
But just all the time, it's might be a bit cheaper as well.
This was back to my
They-
question. It was back to my question, Chair, that didn't quite get answered, was the expectation and ability to follow through.
We do inspections already of these establishments, and obviously we've got 2 individuals that are trained within the team. So Phil and Amy, they've had their training, albeit they've got the part of the qualification to sort of write up their sort of reports as part of their training, which they've actually extended the deadline on nationally, because there's an issue with shortage of inspectors and getting them over that sort of hurdle of doing this course. So that's been announced in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So they're already doing these inspections. The inspections aren't necessarily new, as they came into effect, the regulations came into.
It wasn't a trick question, it was literally,
Yeah.
we see it in planning all the time, start putting conditions on stuff,
Yeah.
and then the public start complaining, and we haven't got any capacity to.
This nationally, there is a relative shortage of qualified animal licensing inspectors at the moment, which still, I think we had a much shorter run-in with the scheme than we thought we were going to be quite honest. So it's up until they've literally just announced an amendment to say that you can carry on doing the inspections as long as you're enrolled on a course, whereas previously, if you hadn't enrolled by the end of this month, that was the end of the grandfather rights for anybody who did animal licensing inspections before. So that's actually gonna help, I think, in some small way, basically. But it's not in any respect unique to North Devon having kind of issues around number. In fact, North Devon are doing quite well to have 2 paid members of staff on books that are qualified. Yeah, they're doing pretty well compared to other councils that I work with in Devon. So yeah, we're doing okay here.
Councillor Cat?
I think Lee's probably just answered that question about how we're doing here in North Devon. Obviously putting all this in place, and I think you've just said basically we're doing okay. I mean, I've been on licensing now for 8 years, and I think there was, only been the very odd occasion where we've had to see somebody because something wasn't right. So I think, like I say, I think you probably answered that one, Lee, and we're doing okay with the policies that we've had. The other question I just had about going back to the primates, if it's covered by, and I know maybe somebody mentioned about putting in, a clause in there, but if it's the primates and it comes under the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, surely that act covers us not allowing it, so that it wouldn't have to come to another committee. Is that not
No.
right or no?
So certain primates do feature on the list of dangerous wild animals.
Okay.
So you would be able to apply for a DWA license, and without that line in the policy, somebody that wished to get a license to keep a primate within that domestic environment would be able to get a dangerous wild animals license potentially. So
Right.
it helps to close that option
That
off.
loophole in that particular Dangerous
Yeah.
Animals Act.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Right, if we move on to do the recommendations then. Is everyone in favour? Please show. Is everybody? Thank you. Thank you. Right. Item 7, Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Policy Amendments, pages 63 to 98.
This follows on from the last report and just drafting now the strategy and resources report for the 7th of November meeting where the bulk of the changes that the policy will go through. And this is kind of an additional look at driver qualification standards specifically, and Lee's done some work surrounding this, and similarly I'm going to hand over to him to run through the report from it.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, so we've had further emails referencing the kind of time it takes to get drivers qualified to become licensed private hire or taxi drivers. And one of the things that they found particularly challenging was the requirement to undertake the BTEC qualification prior to becoming licensed. And that started off some research essentially from our point of view. So we've done an analysis of other licensing authorities across Devon and also our neighbours in South Somerset. And we've looked at their requirements and we've set out how that works in comparison to North Devon. And actually, it's quite interesting to look at that because in many respects, the requirements, as you'd expect, are largely mirrored across all the different authorities. We've got the enhanced DBS requirements. We've got the same degree of medical requirements. In fact, in Devon, we use the same, virtually the same wording across everybody's policy because it was agreed that the Devon licensing officer agreed for medicals. So we've had some real good success in improving consistency across the area. Likewise, practical driving tests, we will use the same, we will approve the same providers across Devon as well. So we've made some really good, progress with that. North Devon stood out in the respect that we require that qualification prior to gaining the licence. And what I found looking specifically at that driver qualification is there was some degree of variance across Devon and Somerset. We have some authorities that are simply looking at safeguarding and disability awareness training course that drivers attend, and then they're happy for people to go off and work as licensed drivers. We have a number of other authorities that have similar qualification standards to North Devon, but they're happy for those drivers to do that in the first year after licensing. So we've set out a number of options here that you may wish to consider to tweak the policy. The thinking is that if we could try and shortcut that process ever so slightly, or to allow them to undertake that training whilst they're already working as a taxi driver, that would help to prevent this potential kind of logjam with the BTEC qualification. And I'd be quite upfront that I think the BTEC qualification is a good qualification. We've looked again at the course content of the BTEC qualification, and I think it's pretty hard to argue with any of the material that they cover. It's all the stuff that you would expect a professional driver that's going to be doing that job well and doing it properly to be covered. It covers elements such as safeguarding, it covers disability awareness, it covers the law around driving a taxi, all number of stuff. There's a little bit of conflict resolution training there. Lots of useful skills will be taken away from that course. So I would say the BTEC course, all of the kind of NVQ type level courses are, of a very good standard. The alternative that you may wish to consider would be a new driver course. So these cover the principal elements of the BTEC course in a shorter format. I think you would be hard pressed to argue you would get as much out of that course as you would do the BTEC, because it's not going to have that level of detail. It's over a day and a half, 2 days, as opposed to, a week and then further coursework, which is what the BTEC's set around. But, it covers the principal elements. So you see this variance across Devon, essentially. And we also have an issue with the knowledge test that's been flagged up to us as well. And this is by members of the team. So members of the team felt there was we were kind of replicating other aspects of the driver application process with our knowledge test, because we specifically asked questions around the highway code in particular. And on talking to the examiners that do our practical driving test, it became quite apparent that they do a number of these highway code questions as part of the test. And if they don't think somebody's got an appreciable knowledge of the highway code, they're definitely not going to pass that test. And we do get failures notified to us at that test. So we felt we were duplicating effort a wee bit there as well. So we would like to look at that as well. We feel that removing that aspect of it would help to shorten the process for the team, and therefore that would mean that they would be able to offer a number of, a few more tests each month, basically, which again would help to try and get the number of drivers up, basically. And as you can see from the report, we've had a reduction in drivers in North Devon. That's a situation that we've seen across the country. The recent statistics that came out of the Department for Transport show that it's 100% a national issue, that North Devon's figures are no real different to the national average in that regard. We're pretty much where we would expect to be given the impact of the pandemic on the taxi trade. So really, this is looking for your kind of indulgence, essentially, basically to consider amending the policy around this area in order to kind of assist with getting more licensed drivers onto circuit. So if I could take you through to some quite long options here. So the recommendations here, that you consider the benchmarking document found at Appendix A. I hope that's illustrative for you, that you can see what your neighbours are doing and how this all works. That you consider any amendments that you wish to make to the driver qualification standard section of the policy, and the options list that you might wish to indicate would be, firstly, to retain the requirement for the vocationally recognised tax qualification. With your indulgence, I'd call that the BTEC from here on in. But amend the policy to allow them to do that in that first 12 months. We've got a number of other authorities in Devon doing that. I'm not aware of any significant issues, and I've set out the case law and the legal framework around that how we would deal with that if somebody didn't undertake that qualification within the 12 months. So we've done some research around that, and we're confident that there's a legal basis that we can deal with that eventuality should it come up. The second option is to remove the requirement for the BTEC and replace that with a new taxi driver training course, which I mentioned, the short format, essentially. The third option is to remove the requirement of the BTEC and replace this with mandatory safeguarding, which we already have mandatory safeguarding within the policy, and also mandatory disability awareness training. And the option there would be to do that upfront or within the first 12 months. The fourth option is to retain the BTEC, but give an alternative training option of a new driver training course, either the vocational recognised tax qualification or the new driver training course, and either or, essentially there. Or the final option is to maintain as is. As I said, there is nothing wrong with the BTEC, it's a good course. I'd ask you to direct us to make amendments to the driver qualification standards section of policy in line with your preferred option, and to approve proposed amendments to the testing of applicants section of the policy, specifically, as I said, remove the highway code section of the policy, because they're tested by other elements of the qualification process. And lastly, to make recommendations to the Strategy and Resources Committee for approval of an amended policy. I appreciate, again, there's quite a lot of information. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lee. Councillor Wiedemann.
Yeah, no, again, thank you, Lee. Thank you, anybody else that was involved in this. Really clear, really, it's in depth. The only thing that's not clear to me reading this, and politicians probably have not read it properly, it is the DBS side of it. I think, just be clear, whatever we decide, they will be DBS checked before they start driving around.
Yes.
Yeah, and I say that because I was genuinely shocked at home at tea one evening when we got into the usual debate about whether it was dad's taxis, mum's taxis, about paying for your own prison taxi. And it was, I ain't getting a taxi with a stranger, and but my wife and my daughters were like, no, I'm getting a taxi. And I'm like, really? They're highly regulated, they're as safe as you could possibly be, blah, blah, blah. And so there is a real reputational problem there. I mean, all right, my dinner table might not reflect wide North Devon, but certainly quality of the food, but I cooked it, by the way. But yeah, I mean, you know, I just feel that we have to maintain standards, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, clearly, you know, ladies in particular are worried about getting a taxi on the road which is, I think, we only got 7%, is it, that are lady drivers? Yeah, something like that, isn't it?
It's quite low.
13%. Yeah, I did read it somewhere, more back in the training last week. But, you know, so it is you know, so, you know, like I say, I don't think we should be doing anything that demeans the standards, and possibly need to be doing more to promote how highly trained, how highly regulated they are, you know. And I think problem is you've had those stories in your Rotherham and one or two others where that goes on mainstream news, people pick up on it, and, you know, so yeah, from that point of view, I think option one is a no-brainer personally, but just that DBS check was the important bit for me, that nobody's driving a taxi around without a DBS check.
So we're not proposing to make any other changes other than to the qualification standard. They would still have the medical, they would still do the practical driving test, which is quite high level. And they would still do the DBS check. So in terms of DBS checking, we've had a kind of quite an increase in the kind of responsibility around that. So they're doing the enhanced version of it. So that brings out any offences that they've had in there, so any previous convictions. With respect to taxi licensing, those convictions don't become spent. But it's particularly, it's one of a small number of regulated occupations that those offences would always appear on that DBS and be relevant for driving a taxi. So we have that, and we've also amended the policy previously to make it a requirement that they subscribe to the update service. So they would be able to produce a new copy of the DBS upon request. So if we get wind that a driver has had issues in that regard, we can request a copy of that and need that new DBS, and they should be able to produce that. And also, the last committee meeting, we approved a point where if a driver was asked to come and give a voluntary interview at the police station, they would be required under the policy to disclose the fact that they're being investigated for an offence, even if they haven't been charged. They've got a requirement in terms of the condition on their licence to disclose that to us. So I feel like we've done a lot in that regard. Some of that's been directed from central government, some of that's been directed by the team from hard-bitten experience of dealing with the taxi trade, basically. And that's not to say that North Devon taxi drivers are problematic any more than anywhere else, but we've had some really good suggestions in that regard. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to potentially try and get something out about that.
I mean, it's just staggering. They were quite happy to catch a bus.
Yeah.
Stand at bus, stop in the dark, on the room. They're not getting a taxi. It's surprising. It's really surprising. Genuinely surprised we came in the middle.
Yeah, can I just say though, I mean, obviously we do the DBS checks, and I think anybody that's involved with young people or children or whatever will you know, does rely on them, but they're only valid on the day they're done. So I understand why a female is still very nervous, because there will always be that first offence. And I don't feel safe, not because it's a taxi driver, but because I'm a female on my own. So I don't think it's the taxi driver. I think it's just how society has made us feel. And as I said, we do get the DBS checks in you know, in all aspects, and that's great. And yes, and it should be the enhanced one, but they are only valid on the day that you see it. The following day, that taxi driver, he could be going into this profession to gain access. Never done anything before, but it could be in his head that that is where he wants to go to commit these offences. So yes, we should continue to do them, but I think people should always think in their head it's only valid on the day that it's done. And 2 days after, they could commit you know, an offence, a sexual offence or anything.
One thing I would raise there is the safeguarding training that we're running for drivers. So, as we mentioned last time, that's free of charge to the trade. We're running those courses between now and January. If you manage to go along to any of those training courses or on the virtual courses and listen in, what you will find is some really, really cracking examples from the trade about what they're doing and how they're trying to make sure their customers are safe. So that, and you're absolutely right, there's always the first offence.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't, when I ran this training elsewhere, I was astonished by some of the lengths that the drivers had gone to try and make sure that they were getting people home safely. And, you know, they were trying really hard with it. And they feel very strongly that if anybody lets their trade down and affects the reputation, that they're going to be on the phone to us, you know, if there's any concerns about anybody. And I think that's what came out of that training for me when I read it before, that they feel like, yeah, they get it. They understand it is part of their remit. They come in pretty grumpy, if I'm honest. And by within half an hour of the training,
It's the same thing I was like that as well. I mean, it was tremendous, really. I mean, is that compulsory part of the training?
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that concerned me from that whole training exercise last week, and it was brilliant, the delivery of it was great, the people that engaged with it was great, but there were at least 2 cameras that never came on the whole morning. So they could well have just joined the meeting and gone off and done 2 or 3 fares and not actually done it at all. And
Was that taxi drivers
yeah, I
that
mean,
disappeared? Yeah,
it's, well, I didn't say they disappeared, I'm just saying
they weren't on view. Yeah.
their cameras never.
I didn't know how
Two
to
of them.
log on there. Oh, you left out me how to book on it. So,
Okay. Councillor Henderson?
Mine's been answered, thank you.
Okay, I've got some things around safeguarding. Obviously, safeguarding is about awareness of problems and also awareness of the signs of abuse. Okay, and also knowing what to do if you see it. And my concern would be that if we don't have these sorts of trainings prior, there could be a missed opportunity there. So in the case of, let's say there was a serious case review and it was revealed that a taxi driver hasn't got any safeguarding understanding and he, you know, let a case slip through his fingers, you know, there might be potentially repercussions of us for not having made him aware of safeguarding obligations. So I think all of whatever training we decide, my preference would be it's done prior, just from a security of the passenger's point of view. My other question was around this new taxi driver training course. Who would be delivering that?
I've been able to find it would be a similar format, so it would likely be predominantly online seminar type setup. We've got there is a trainer in Devon that runs courses in that regard. He's based out of Plymouth. He does an awful lot of disability awareness training as well. Yeah, very good person, very nice style of delivery, and it's very tailored, as you'd expect, to people coming into the taxi trade and learning about all of that.
Yeah.
I totally take on board your comment with the safeguarding.
Yeah.
It could be that you go for a blended version here in that instance, so that it'd be a requirement that they attend safeguarding training prior to obtaining a license, but perhaps not the formal qualification, if that was.
Yeah.
That may assist your.
And I was thinking also about, I'll come back to that in a moment, but just going back to this new taxi training, obviously part of the problem, this is arisen from the taxi drivers obviously not being able to get licenses quickly enough. Okay, so if the BTEC courses are taking a while to get onto, how is this going to be quicker, the second set of training, or alternative set of training, I should say? Would that be more accessible?
Yeah, no, I've asked that specific question. They said at least monthly would be
Right.
so, and that's the difference with the BTEC. So the BTEC in this instance, particularly with this complaint, is they've waited several months for the BTEC course, and then unfortunately that course was then cancelled, so there was a knock-on effect. So we do feel like we haven't got a great deal of resilience in that respect with the BTEC qualification. It's widely quoted in taxi policies, the BTEC qualification, across the country. And I think certainly when you start doing some research around this, there's not a huge number of providers actually for that qualification around. That's a snag. So I think having that flexibility of a few more months to perhaps undertake that qualification it would certainly be beneficial, in my opinion. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, there is a difference between the new driver course and this. It's short and sweet. I haven't sat that particular course, but I know the trainer well, having used him previously, and his courses have always been of very high quality. And there are a number of different similar sorts of courses appearing to come onto the market to kind of service that issue.
And similarly with disability training, I noticed that in chart 6 of the survey that went out, a lot of prosecutions have been because of a lack of understanding of things like assistance dogs. So again, I think prior to them starting, they ought to have a basic awareness of issues around disability. So when I went through the 5 options, I don't know about anyone else, I instantly dismissed 1, 4 and 5, and I was sort of stuck with 2 and 3. Again, questions about this taxi course, you're telling us that it's actually pretty quick to get onto. So that would be a possibility. And with the third one, again, I would prefer the prior to obtaining a license option rather than the within the first 12 months, because then if they don't do it, then you've got the whole fiasco of then having to revoke licenses and all that kind of thing, all that kind of thing going on. So that would save officer time as well. The other thing I had a query about was the larger picture and the fact that they've come to us saying that there aren't enough taxi drivers. So I'm wondering about demand, because I noticed again in the survey, when you look at the types of trips that are being taken, the majority, I think it's 65%, comes under leisure and shopping. And obviously more people shop online now. Also, with the cost of living crisis, I imagine there are less journeys are going to be required of taxis, because people aren't going to go into town and go shopping. Obviously, there are going to be those other areas like commuting for work and education. Obviously, that's going to happen. But I just wonder that they're saying there aren't enough taxi drivers, but actually, is there enough demand for them anyway? I don't know.
You obviously haven't tried to get a taxi.
Yeah.
Oh, is it hard? Is it?
Possible.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
So-
right, okay. Yeah, and I
Which
understand,
really puts people at safety.
Yeah, I
I've
understand
said previously,
a lack
you
of
know,
drivers
people-
could lead
well,
to,
it causes
Yeah.
you're not getting people away from the taxi.
yeah, okay,
This is night time.
They're causing problems. If you're leaving people that work in these establishments, or people that, young vulnerable people still on the right, Marston Square for an hour and a half waiting for a taxi, they're, I think putting them at quite severe risk.
yeah, I've seen.
Probably more risk hanging around the town centre than they are in
Mm.
taxi. The chances of a road taxi driver against, the person.
That's certainly the picture from talking to other authorities, certainly in sort of Exeter, Plymouth, Torbay, that's their concern, that they don't have enough licensed vehicles on circuit at the kind of key times of a Saturday evening and Friday evening, and then that drop off in drivers has impacted those hours of the day more than the normal kind of days, because there's more drivers that want to work more social hours. Basically, the drop off has really affected that kind of nighttime driver aspect of it. Is this anecdotally what I've been told by sort of private hire operators and other licensing authorities. Just to clarify, with respect to the new driver training course, that does cover both safeguarding and disability awareness, in some detail. So I would be confident that would be something that they would have the required knowledge, particularly around things like their responsibilities around assistance dogs and so on.
So if that's the case, then it almost lends itself more to option 2, doesn't it? Because then all of that's covered.
Yeah,
Option 2.
I disagree, Sharon.
What options have better people?
I think you need a beefed up option 1 person. I think the
option 1, yeah.
vocational thing is really important.
Can I just ask, what were the officers? What option would the officers like to choose?
It's option 1.
I think that there's a good case to have both options on the table in terms of the new driver training course or the BTEC. My preference is for the BTEC. It's known, it's trusted, it's done the job. So I like the idea of maintaining that. I can understand the chair's issues around not having those qualifications beforehand. If we make it a requirement that people do safeguarding and disability awareness prior to obtaining a license, that's great, but that then puts a requirement on the authority to to put those training courses on, you know, for a sustained period of time when we would otherwise rely on that initial training course, basically like that. So there's a financial knock-on effect to the authority in that regard. Yeah, it's like I said,
Licence fees.
Yeah.
And depending on the availability of the trainer, depends how many courses you allow, because at the moment with the safeguarding training that we're just seeking to mandate, we've stipulated that that's provided by Karen Anderson, and Frank came on the course as a sort of a trial, and she is incredibly good, and she does make that course very tailored to the taxi profession. It's not generic, it relates to them and their activities. Our preference would be to continue to utilise something like that rather than a generic safeguarding course. We both looked at quite a number of options. Bernardo's, for example, provide an online course. Blue Lamp provide a course. It was almost that you scroll through an online virtual basis, a number of questions. For me, having done those, you tried them, you weren't engaging at all. And the difference in standard in those courses was quite remarkable. And I came away probably like Frank thinking, crikey, that was not only engaging, it was really informative, and it was really hard hitting in terms of the message. We used some good video clips and so on, and it was great. The only, I guess, reservation in having that in advance of the licence is you've got the same situation that you're then you're reliant on their trainer and their availability if they go on holiday or they're sick or whatever. You've got that reliance on an individual prior to the licence, which is where some of these complaints have stemmed. I forget when it was that we brought into effect the BTEC. I have in my mind it was 2014, and over those 7 or so years, we have had times where it's worked really well. And we've gone through a lot of training providers who've done the BTEC, depending on government funding and the way that the funding was classed. Sometimes it's been excellent and there's been lots of availability and it's been really smooth. And every time we've had a rocky ride, and in my time in licensing, we've probably come to committee 3 or so times before saying that we're having a problem with the BTEC, and we've always sort of continued on with it, which may not have been the right call, but we've continued on and maintained that level of qualification. I think there is something about, because it's vocationally sort of recognised and you've got the ability to do that whilst you are driving, there is the potential there. But yeah, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's
I'd still be interested in the answer to Paul's question.
Yeah, I mean, the new driver training courses are becoming more, if you look around at people's licensing policies, which is a bit of a pass on my mind, it's becoming more frequently referenced, I would say, as an option for training courses. I say this being slightly biased on the basis that, as I know a very good local trainer that would deliver an excellent course, but we're reliant on my local knowledge in that respect. But there's a number of these online type qualifications popping up as new driver focused qualifications that would give some degree of flexibility, and that may be, and given that there's greater availability, that may assist in terms of kind of.
So are you saying you're saying 2 then, option 2?
Yeah, I like the idea of, I don't like the idea of dropping the BTEC altogether, if I'm honest. I think that certain drivers will want to do that, and it's a really good qualification, so we shouldn't rule that out. But I think if we added the option to do a shorter training course for the moment, that may assist. And we could always come back and look at that again in the future. You may decide that the BTEC is the way to go and try it and see. It's nothing set in stone in this regard. You can review this in a year's time if you wish to.
Is that online? Sorry, you've been waiting ages.
Can I just ask?
Sorry, Yvette,
Yeah.
your hand.
A quick question. I've been reading Appendix B. Has that issue been resolved with anyone taxis in Ilfracombe? Because obviously, they've got people going through training, but there's no date on this, but he mentioned we took on 2 new drivers in early April, and obviously they were waiting for their badges and things like that. So, I don't know when this was sent in, because there's not a date on it. I just wondered if it had been resolved, because obviously, they're taking on more contracts.
I think there's been BTEC since, and I imagine that issue has been resolved.
We've got that letter there, and
Yeah.
and I read it, and I just thought, well, has it been resolved?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that has been
Yeah.
resolved, but
That's the question.
yeah, the issue still remains is that for any repeat driver, we're still at the mercy of the training course and when
Yes.
it's going to be.
And because they said that, about their badges, but when they were awaiting BTEC training, we had to ask if there were any way temporary badges could be issued, but the answer was no to that.
No. I think there was always historically, through the chair, historically, there was always a concern that someone could ask to be granted a hackney carriage licence and not a dual hackney carriage private hire licence. And therefore, we would have a difficulty in imposing condition. But we've actually tightened up that part of the policy. So we've basically said we'll only issue a dual licence, in which case that condition would be imposed. Because at one point, I think it was a number of years ago, we did licence a hackney carriage only driver, and therefore you can't impose a condition on that part of the licence. And so legally, there was a level of concern about that, but obviously the policy has changed.
So on the
Subsequent to that concern.
Yeah, and on the whole, this has probably been sorted by now, then I should imagine.
I think so.
It's quite a long letter.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for that.
Can I just come back to the options a moment? No, I did, sorry, Liz. I did compare the curriculum of the BTEC with these proposed options here on option 2. And the BTEC contains a few, obviously it's a lot bigger. So it contains, you're right, health and safety, road safety, vehicle maintenance, and the transporting of other items such as luggage, which aren't, horrendously important in terms of when you compare it to things like safeguarding. So I did, when I was going through this earlier, I did think of maybe there's a way around it in terms of, because I think you get your license for 1 year, don't you, new drivers? So if they did some more basic training, either the new course or the CSE prior, if they then work towards their BTEC afterwards, is there any possibility they may get maybe a reduction in their license renewal if they can prove that they've taken that course to its full extent?
I don't think so
No.
in that respect, basically, because the cost of worked out on the basis of what it costs the authority to produce that licence.
Just trying to think of incentives,
I understand. So I'm thinking of Torbay in particular did manage to offer an incentive for new drivers. I didn't get a response. I asked them, I said, well, how are you funding this? And I think I've maybe phrased it in the wrong way because it might have given it away that I thought there was possibly a legal issue with it. But they had, I don't know how they're doing it, but they did reduce fees for new drivers, basically. But essentially that I think that puts you into a difficult legal position, because then any other driver that comes in for renewal would say, well, why am I not getting the reduced fee? If that's what it costs you to produce that licence, why am I not getting it? And I think the worry is that the taxi trade are sufficiently litigious that we would face a challenge if we did that. I don't know whether Torbay have, and good on them if they have found a way to get around it, but I'm not aware of how we can structure it like that. Unfortunately, I'd love to. It'd be really helpful. It'd be really helpful for this, and it would be really helpful to put a discount for wheelchair accessible vehicles. We could all do that. It would make taxi licensing a lot easier.
Okay, Councillor Bullard.
This might not be in our remit in our decisions tonight. I'm just thinking, what Councillor Biederman and Councillor Khan said about girls not wanting to go to taxis. In this BTEC training or safeguarding training, is there any training for the drivers for their personal protection? Because I know women that have considered going into taxi driving and they have been so reluctant to do it because they don't feel safe. Is there anything in the training that they get to protect themselves? To encourage more people to come forward for taxi driving? Because I know that is an issue, especially with
It's
late
a really
night.
good point.
I think I have made that point before when we were talking about taxis. I think, you know, the safety,
Yeah,
as they are vulnerable for accusation as well, so.
because like I say, someone may come in with a clean record and they might want to use a taxi driver, getting in a taxi to obviously rob the taxi or whatever and that sort of thing, and they're at risk, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. If you look at the trade publications, you know, taxi drivers are being attacked and mugged, you know, sort of across the country on an alarmingly regular basis, I would say, with this.
Oh,
There
yeah.
are courses around, there's self-defense courses, and there's, the best course probably, given it's in a confined space, might be, is probably conflict resolution training. And it talks to you about how to use body language and the tone of your voice and all of that sort of stuff in the few situations. So that's probably the key course.
Which is difficult when you got your back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Body language is out.
Councillor Peterman?
Yeah, I'm, you know, this has been a good debate. I'm still wanting to hear, I mean, I think ultimately, we want to hear your recommendation, what, you know, I mean, in a way, you've given us 4 or 5 operate real detailed options there, and you're the professionals, and I think Paul has, and I still think you've still not really said, I guess you wanted the feedback from us. I think the feedback that's coming around the room is we want people to feel secure getting in a taxi. We want them to be safe, because the worst thing for us or anybody is that somebody can, you know, which one fits, and, you know, do we need to beef up? I mean, I still got a bit of a problem around that training last week, because the training was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but 2 screens never came on.
Yeah.
If we went down the road of this type of training, do we know that they've done it online? You know, because presumably these people have got that tick in the box last week, and for all we know, they clicked on them, joined the meeting, and then went off and were never seen again. You know,
I know
that was the only thing that I picked up, was that, you know, I would be a bit reluctant to go down this lesson thing if we don't actually know that they've done it and they've engaged it.
Yeah,
and-
after the,
that's
give it some
it's gone in.
introduction with them at the commencement.
Right.
And I think, because obviously if there's been slight video issue, sometimes it affects quality of the
I
sound.
mean, obviously you'll know by the feedback form. I mean, all right, they might not fill the feedback form at the end.
They all did feel feedback in, because we've had all of those come back.
You did come in. Well, that's good,
Yeah,
because
so we know
that sort of reassures me a
and
bit.
their introduction at the start, but it's not.
You know where I'm coming from. I mean, it was quite
Yeah.
classical one moment that somebody's camera come on perfectly by accident. He's obviously clicked it, and it was just carnage, wasn't it? There was 2 children in the middle of the room. You know, there was toys everywhere. It was, you know, it was back to the good old days when we all started doing Zoom with, you know, people getting caught out. But it was, you know, well, actually, the bloke who did it probably engaged more than
Yes,
anybody else in the course,
Yeah.
but it did make me chuckle.
yeah.
So,
Councillor Pearson?
I just, is it right to infer from what you said that you're kind of favouring option 4, really?
Yeah, that'd be my personal view.
And
I don't know whether Katie has view as the department manager.
Yeah, which I think is flexible and still requires the actual training, so it looks to me like also the most flexible and still achieves what you want, which is the license.
Absolutely, and I take the importance of Edelman's comments. I mean, it's difficult writing this report to try and pitch this in a way that is to cover the different aspects that you may wish to consider with this. So that's why I wouldn't normally put that number of options in a report. It's a tricky issue. We recognise that we've got a supply and demand issue here. We've long had issues with kind of availability of the VTech being sort of better and worse. So yeah, it's a 40-year-old issue, this, to be honest. I know that the trainer that undertakes the new driver qualification locally is absolutely adamant that people's cameras have to be on. He will push for that, so that is an element. And I've sat through the safeguarding training in person, and I've seen people totally unengaged. You know, they might as well not be there, but most people will engage.
Oh, no, brilliant. Yeah, the ones that
And it's that, a lot of them thanks to that delivery, that really effective delivery.
That's interesting.
But you can make it such that, as you said, if you haven't got your camera on.
Yeah.
Then you cannot qualify.
Yeah.
And that can just be a.
Well, I say, we said at the start, is that I might ask you, because sometimes you do need to turn them off for the quality of the course. But if the instructor said at the start that points during this morning, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, there's that as well, or
Yeah.
maybe at the end, they have to do an interactive,
Yes, they did all do that.
the question, well, if they answer the questions correctly, then.
Yeah, well, that, it was more feedback about the course. You
No, I don't mean
could have
feedback.
said, yes, it was
No,
brilliant.
no, I don't mean feedback about the course, I mean, like,
It was
questions
questions
which
questions about what.
Yeah.
what's your person
Shared
do,
learning.
share the learning, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just,
I'm sorry.
I could
Carry on.
exactly, yeah.
No, please carry on.
yeah, I was just thinking, one other thing in terms of if we had the safeguarding training being provided after the licence was granted, to avoid or alleviate element of concern about, you know, perhaps where they would report and safeguarding concern, etc. Opposed to issue some information with the general principles and those key numbers as to where and how to make contact with the relevant agencies. So that's something that would perhaps alleviate some concern. It certainly is going to go nowhere near the full training, but we could alleviate concern by making sure we administer that. And similarly, at the moment, the drivers do go through a video, and I've forgotten the name. The title.
Those skills.
Those skills.
Terrible video.
It's not the best video,
But it gets the point
but
across.
it gets a point across in terms of disabilities and how they're dealt with. And they all watch that when they do their driver interviews, and we're not planning on sort of deviating from that. So, yeah.
So once they've done this training, do they automatically then get their license, or do you interview them afterwards? Do they get interviewed afterwards?
The other steps still all apply as they do now.
Yeah,
It's it's purely around that step around the qualification.
Yeah.
Every other aspect of the process to become a licensed taxi driver, which is a lengthy process, remains as it.
So they do get interviewed afterwards?
We have
Yeah.
to do
Knowledge.
tests throughout.
Yeah,
this.
so then you can check them whether they've actually done the course by asking them relevant questions, or whether they've paid attention on the course, wouldn't you? Yeah, no?
So I think we do need to try and find that middle ground, and actually, we can always review it. If we find there's issues, either they still can't get on the course, or we find there are safeguarding issues that have been alerted, we can always look at it again. But it still doesn't need to be switched off, should we prefer?
Sharon, if you want, I'm gonna try it. I think, I really think Katie are important here, because and I agree with Paul,
Yeah.
from what he said.
Well, I'm happy to second that, Frank, if you're going to.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll support.
it's whether you want, the bit that worries me from it, and whether we can add a line, is that they then wait 11 months and then start trying to put themselves on a course.
Yeah.
And then come back to think, oh, I tried, whether there should be a line that you have to put on at the earliest. So if there was a course after a month, we would realistically expect them to take it.
Yeah.
They should be attempting from day one to get on that course.
Yeah,
You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
They're just gonna say, great, I've got 11 months employment here.
valid point, because we've got some resistance with some of the drivers accessing safeguarding training, and they are being slightly belligerent, saying, well, it's 2 hours of my time, and I've done this.
Could save a life, never mind.
This is ridiculous, and we've got a few digging their heels in. And, we will see how we get on with things, and maybe coming before you in January. Because they haven't been willing to do it and
Yeah.
refusing to do it. in
Can
which
it be
case we'll
granted
have to do it.
subject to them having a booking on a course? In advance,
So not bad, thank you.
so they can actually,
I just want a line that
Yeah.
they don't just let it go 11 months.
everybody be put, but that's, they don't have to book the course, but then actually booked on the course when they.
Of course, there's no guarantee that course will run though. And I noticed in one of the reports there, it did say that they are cancelled if there aren't enough people booked on. So again, there's no guarantees, and then
Especially if they
things
were
can change, can't they?
I think having the new driver course as an option is gonna allow them more flexibility about when they do that training course. So because if they can't get on the local course, they'll be able to find another course that they'll be able to do somewhere in the country, basically, they can join virtually within a short space of time, because they are popping up these types of courses. So this seems to be the trend. So as I said, I like the BTEC course. In an ideal world, they would all do the BTEC. But I think having the option for the new driver course, they're realistically going to have an option to be able to do that in a timely manner if it's really important for them to get that qualification, and start, a new contract as a Devon County driver, for instance. They'll be able to find a course in that instance. So I think there's a degree of flexibility. So if you wish to look at option 4, I think the feedback in the room is that you want them to have a qualification prior to obtaining the licence. And I think having that new driver option gives you some degree of flexibility there.
Yeah, and just to also clarify, talk about, Councillor Bigger was saying about not booking it to the 11th month. If they haven't got it by their 12 months, their licence is not renewed, is that right?
Yeah, so we've set out the legal basis there. There is some good case law around this. And essentially the local authority, if they're not able to fulfil that condition on their licence, then that would be very, very solid grounds to refuse to renew.
Right, okay, so then
They
that's,
have a right of appeal to the magistrates court, but realistically, I think that the prospect of any successful challenge is going to be limited.
so that's their incentive then to actually do book on as soon as possible, isn't it? Okay, is everyone happy? Is there any more questions? No, right, so all of the recommendations.
2 options again.
Don't give us 5, especially not half past 7 at night.
So we're going to go with all the recommendations, and with 2.1.2, we think option 4. Okay, someone else want to propose that? Richard?
Being pulled between us, dear.
Yeah, you propose that, okay.
1 second it and I'll.
All right, all those in favour then, please
Is that
show.
majority? I'll take it.
There we go.
Well, I won't sure that.
Excuse me, sir, would that be prior to obtaining the licence, or would that be within the first 12 months?
Oh, let's
Sorry.
find that one.
You've got this.
What it says in
Well,
4.
why don't we go for 4?
Option 4 does say both, to be fair. Do we want to narrow that down?
My recommendation would be that given
You reckon you can do one within a month, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I given the
okay.
issues
That would be my
raised,
You're gonna wait, you're
Yeah.
gonna wait a month for your DBS probably.
Yeah, so-
Submit it.
They take that a long time to come through.
Just for.
Option 4, prior to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
New driver course and within 4.
so we're crossing out the last sentence, half a
Yeah.
sentence there. In the case of the new, sorry, again,
Is that
this
it?
would be,
Well,
this
you
would
could
be
join one.
prior to obtaining a licence.
You can join a course.
In the case of new driver course or within the first 12 months of the licence for the vocational.
Hang on,
Isn't
let
four.
me just reread that, sorry.
It's neither or. They either have a new
Driver
driver course
training
or
course.
they get
Not
they,
last bit.
within the first 12 months, get this.
I'm persuaded to say that it would be either course, but prior to obtaining a licence.
That's not what it
based on-
says.
based on the-
That's not what it says.
So I would hasten that.
Yeah, prior to obtaining a licence, so we.
Poor old Loriana.
Got it
I'm happy to
there.
get on with it, sorry, Emma. Right.
It's basically right, I'll try to read it out. To retain the requirement for a vocationally recognised taxi qualification, but give an alternative training option of a new driver training course, either the vocationally recognised taxi qualification or the new taxi driver training course, prior to obtaining a licence, in the case of the new driver course.
So what I'm saying is they could do either course, so we're keeping the BTEC can be, so at the moment we have.
The BTEC might happen, there's one.
The BTEC course, the BTEC course, at the moment,
Okay,
they have to do prior to getting that licence. So what we're saying here is they could do the BTEC or
Yeah,
the new driver qualification prior to.
but it's the
I
prior.
could do the new
Yeah.
driver and then.
Yeah.
Think, well, I'd rather, I want to put on my advertising ticket that I'm also BTEC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, is that an option then? So they can do the new driver course
You drive.
beforehand, or the
Yeah.
BTEC beforehand, or they can do the new driver course beforehand and during the 12 months previous, if they wish to, they can
They can
do the BTEC.
essentially, if they've done either, or with that wording, if they've done either of those qualifications, they can obtain the licence. And if they wish to do further qualifications thereafter, that would be entirely their remit.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable that that is going to dip standards? I am, because I think you've got the safeguarding.
I think it
And not the
correlates.
EBS, but
I think it correlates when you look at that gap, when you look at that analysis of the evident authorities, I think it sits pretty, pretty well in the middle ground there. Nationally, as I say, the trend is for more of these kind of new driver type courses as opposed to the BTEC. So I think we're giving an option that may give us a degree of future proofing with the policy, or we may go back in 12 months to review it again,
Yeah.
like I say, but I would hope that it would future proof it.
Okay,
I hope you and maybe other councillors can join these new training like we did for safeguarding, because I think you do need to be reassured that people are engaging it.
Yeah.
Are
Well,
there
and
the whole
hopefully
duration,
yes,
and there is some sort of, well, I mean, I assume we can be.
well, the first thing you learn in safeguarding training, I'm sure you've all taken it, is that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. So the attitude that, oh, I'm not doing that, well, I'm sorry, how would you feel if it was your daughter or your wife or
Well, I said,
whoever?
last week,
you know?
and you blamed me, really.
Yeah.
It all came under children's scrutiny.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
came all about 7 years ago when we had a problem in Newtown.
Mm.
And it was horrifying, really, that, oh, they were completely oblivious what could do it.
Yeah.
They were teaching other people to their, work for it, to be abused. And it was horrendous.
Yeah,
In terms of how you book on, Orion has sent around the link to the booking for the safeguarding training, and it's fairly straightforward. You click on that link and you can just choose a course. There's lots of different dates and times available. There's 8 left.
It really is good. It's worth it for every one of us. Like
25th, I'm gonna roll.
We'll do it on the phone.
I say, I'd like to get the postman trained.
I'm struggling.
No, I always do with this, so,
Oh, okay.
so I ring and say it's me and you help them do.
Right, okay, so, happy with that, Rena?
I'm happy to
Yeah.
help you want to bring
That's, thank you, oh gosh, she's gonna do it.
I think we can officially close the meeting, and that's, oh, you're welcome. Yeah.